8.6, we're going to get a new way to do the same type of questions that we had yesterday, and that's going to be using these proportions. You'll recognize those from the last chapter. We did a bunch of them. A proportion is where one fraction equals another fraction. I'm going to start by going back to yesterday. I really prefer the equation we did yesterday, that we did percent times the whole equals the part. I'm probably going to do most of the questions this way in class. If you have questions, I can show you the other way. But when we did this, we had to take that percent and we had to divide by 100 to convert it to a decimal form. Maybe I'll write that, to convert to a decimal. So if you have, like, say 42%, we would put a 0.42 there in the problem. Or if we had a 3.5%, in each of these cases we take and we move that decimal point 2 places. So 3.5% would be 0.035. So you always do that. And then if you're doing a question and you get an answer, you're solving for a percent, your answer looks something like that, well, then you have to remember to move the decimal point again to make it 3.5%. Or move the decimal point 2 places again to make it 42%, if you're undoing it. This new equation does that, moving the decimal automatically for you, and that's maybe why some people prefer it. But they start with the percent divided by 100. That'll be the first fraction. And now you can just put in whatever the percent number is. You could put in one of these. You don't have to convert it, because dividing by 100 automatically moves that decimal point 2 places. And that's going to equal the part divided by the whole. And if you think back to the last chapter, if 100% is the total amount, the 100% and the whole would line up. Kind of like in the last chapter, the bottom units were the same. And the percent is going to be the part of 100, and that gives you the part of the whole. So those are the same. So hopefully it kind of makes sense logically. Here's how to do a few examples, a couple examples, I guess, and then we will be done. So I'm going to start by writing percent divided by 100 equals the part divided by the whole. And if you think back to yesterday, we said that there were words that were kind of associated with these, that this whole is often associated with that word of, and the part is often associated with the word is. And that same kind of general rule still applies. So as we have example 1, what percent of 64? Well, the of is kind of paired up with that whole, so 64 now is going to go down there in my whole spot. So my second fraction, I have a 64 down below. And is associated with the part, so is 18. Well, that 18 then has to go up here. So we have an 18. So that's my second fraction. My first fraction then, I have my 100 in the denominator. It looks like we're trying to find the percent. What percent of 64 is 18? So you can put an X up there for the percent. Now there's a couple ways to solve it. One way, maybe I'll just stick with this way that works for everything, is to cross multiply and divide. So I have 64x, 64 times x, equals 100 times 18. Well, that'll give me 1,800 there on the right, equals 64x. All right, if we're looking to get x by itself, you have to say, well, how do we undo what was done to x? X was multiplied by 64, so we divide by 64 there. And doing that, I get x equals 28.125. Now, because we use this new proportion thing, we don't have to go and move decimal points around. That 100 kind of already took care of it. So that's our final answer. It's just going to be 28.125%. So it's perhaps a little bit nicer that way, because you don't have to move decimal points, but I still prefer the other. All right, so let's do this example 2. Start out by percent over 100 equals the part divided by the whole. And now if we go through and say, all right, where do we put these things? So I have 36 is. So 36 is paired with kind of that word is. That's going to be our part. 36 is 80%. Well, the 80% then could go over here in our percent thing. So we just put in an 80. And I can fill in my fraction and my equals, all right? Of what number? So we're trying to say of what number? Well, the of is paired with a whole. In other words, we're trying to find the whole. which even if we don't look at it this way, hopefully it makes sense to fill things in that way. And we have our 100 you copy down. But 36 is 80% of what number? 36 is that 80%. So both of those then go in the top, because 36 is the 80%, the number's the whole. All right, so we could go through and cross multiply. So I have an 80 times x equals 100 times 36. So we get 3,600 here on the right, and that equals my 80x. And same as the last one, all right, what was done to x? X was multiplied by 80. So we need to divide by 80 to get x by itself. And that gives me x equaling 45. So what is the 45? Well, 45 is that number right there. It's going to be that whole amount. So the whole amount is 45, and 80% of that number would be 36. So that's it. Now this section here, you have options. You could go through, you could do them all this way. In some respects, that's smart because it gives you practice in it. If you prefer to use the 8-5 stuff, I'm okay with you doing these questions the way we did in the last section, where you do the percent times whole equals the part up here at the top. So choice is up to you. Go through, get the answer one of the two ways. Showing your work is a plus. Let me know if you have questions in class.